Thanks for tuning in to the Art of Historical Cookery. I'm Joyce White, a food historian, and I specialize in the foodways of the people who lived in Maryland and the larger Chesapeake region during the 18th and early 19th centuries. Trying to accurately recreate historic recipes certainly has its challenges. First of all, our cooking methods are different, which may yield different results. Secondly, certain ingredients that may once have been very popular may no longer be easy to get because they're just not marketed anymore. And lastly, our foods are produced and processed in different ways today, which can also yield different results. Despite all these challenges though, I'm going to make every effort to help you try to recreate a taste of the past, which is one of the best links we have to our ancestors. In this episode, we will make two different versions of a recipe called Narragansett strawberry bread, made with Indian corn, otherwise known as maize. This recipe is based on one observed being made by the Narragansett people of present-day Rhode Island by Roger Williams in 1636. Roger Williams was ordained in the Church of England, but decided to leave that church because he found it had become too corrupt. He then became a Protestant Puritan because he thought by doing so, he could help create an entirely new church in the New World. As a result, in 1631, Williams moved to the very Puritan colony of Massachusetts Bay. Williams found Puritan intolerance of other religions and their belief in the right to confiscate lands held by Native people very troubling. Consequently, in 1636, Williams was banished from Massachusetts Bay for voicing his differing views. He traveled to what is now Rhode Island's Narragansett Bay region, where he made his new home on land he purchased, not confiscated or stole, from the local Narragansett tribe. Let's get cooking with the first recipe for Narragansett strawberry bread. Roger Williams wrote a book called A Key into the Language of America, in which he documented his observations of the Narragansett people, including much about what they ate, including a cornbread made with strawberries. Williams wrote, "The Indians bruise strawberries in a mortar and mix them with meal and make strawberry bread. They also make great use of their strawberries, having such abundance of them, making strawberry bread and having no other food for many days." Before we make this recipe, first we must talk about corn varieties. Narragansett people primarily grew flint corn, a type that does well in the harsher climate and shorter growing season of the north. Flint varieties came in many colors, such as yellow, white, blue, and red, or purple. They also grew other types of corn, such as flour and dent varieties. To store corn for long periods of time, it was left in the fields on the stalks until it dried out completely. The kernels could then be removed from the cobs as needed. To protect it from rodents and insects such as weevils and mealworms, Native Americans coated corn with an alkaline product, either slaked lime, which is calcium hydroxide, available now commercially as Col, or wood ashes, which leach out sodium hydroxide, available now as food-grade lye. When ready to eat, dried corn was processed to remove the tough fibrous outer hull called the pericarp. The germ also could loosen and separate. Native Americans processed corn in two ways. First, they stone ground the kernels, often coated with the alkaline wood ashes or lime, and then sifted the meal to remove most of the tough fibrous pericarps and bits of germ. This method was very time and labor intensive. Another somewhat less labor intensive but still quite time consuming method was to make hominy, a type of corn processed by boiling with the alkaline, which loosens the fibrous pericarp and germ, which can then be removed. The addition of alkaline substances, as was often the case, not only made this process easier, but it made the resulting corn product more nutritious by increasing its calcium content and altering the size of its molecules of niacin, which is vitamin B3, to make them small enough for humans to digest. Whole kernels of hominy can be added to soups and stews, or the kernels can be ground into grits for breads or thickeners for stews. The recipe for strawberry bread Roger Williams published includes the term meal, denoting cornmeal, but he doesn't give more clues as to the exact type. When making this recipe, I used a combination of stone ground meals, such as hominy grits, medium grind cornmeal, and finely ground corn flour to create complex textures and flavors. Now it's finally time to get into the kitchen to make this recipe. The first thing we have to do is prepare the strawberries. So if you were making this recipe during strawberry season, then by all means go ahead and use fresh strawberries. If not, I like to use dried strawberries throughout the rest of the year. So if you are going to use mashed, I suggest you get a mortar and pestle if you have one, and just mash them up in here, or you can use a bowl and any kind of potato mash or anything that you happen to have on hand, that's fine. So we're gonna set this aside because I'm not using fresh today. Today I'm going to be using the dried, and here are the dried. You'll need 1 cup fresh or ½ cup dried strawberries. I'd like to chop them up into tiny little bits, and if you like, you can even soak these in boiling water to plump them up again. So I think I might do that because that's always fun, or you could do a combination of unsoaked and soaked. So whatever you like, whatever your particular tastes are, you go for it, that's just fine. Now it's time to cook the cornmeal. I have 3 different kinds of cornmeal here. I like to add a variety of textures. So the first are hominy grits, which would be the coarsest. Then 1 cup white or yellow hominy grits. Then I've got your bog standard yellow cornmeal, which is like sort of a medium coarse grind. 3/4 cup standard white or yellow stone ground cornmeal. And then finally, I have a finer grind white cornmeal here. 1/2 cup white or yellow finely ground cornmeal. I'm going to simply start by placing these 3 into my mixing bowl. And you want to make sure you use a heat-safe bowl for this because you are going to be adding boiling water, so you don't want to crack any bowls that you might be using. First, we're going to mix in some salt. 1 teaspoon salt. And now for the trickier part. This is the part where you incorporate the boiling water into the cornmeal, and it's really important when you do this to whisk as you do it. And I like to keep moving the whisk as well as the cup that I'm using to pour the water. I find it just gives a good ability to get everything mixed up here without getting any of those terrible lumps that you can have. 1½ cups boiling water. Now that we've got all of the cornmeal mixed with the boiling water, it's time to add the berries. So I've got my dried, chopped up strawberries here, and these have not been soaked. But these ones have been soaked. So I am just going to scoop them out and kind of squeeze out the moisture because you really don't want to have too much of that moisture in there. Now, I like to sort of lay this batter out on a board just so it can get exposed to the cooler air so that it will firm up a little bit, and that will make forming the individual breads much more easy to happen. It won't fall apart so much. So just kind of spread it out, and as it cools, it will firm up a little bit, but you don't want it to cool too much because you don't want them to completely solidify. You just want them to be able to be handled a little bit more easily. Let the cornbread batter sit for just a few minutes, no more than about 5 minutes, maybe 3 even is fine, depending on how thinly you spread it out. Then what I do is using a measuring spoon like this one. This is a 2 tablespoon size, which is great. And it's actually a coffee scoop spoon, so if you have one of those, you can use that. And then I fill it up with the mixture, and then I pat it into my hands, and I just then shape it neatly into a nice circle. As you can see, I finished forming all of my breads, my individual little patties here, or cakes, and I used a measure of about 2 tablespoons, and I got 19 different cakes. But if you wanted to extend this, you could certainly add more strawberries or any other kind of berries that you might have in season, so that's fine. So now it's time to actually cook the breads. And I'm using an electric griddle or skillet. I like to use this because it gives me a uniform heat throughout the cooking process. You can certainly use a frying pan over a stovetop, or you can use one of those iron griddles that you can lay right down on top of the range as well. Any of those will work. When I was starting out as a museum educator, I was able to take a lot of training classes, which is a lot of fun. It's a great part of the job. And I took several where I learned how to cook using Native American techniques. So I learned how to make cakes just like these, making a makeshift hearth on top of rocks. So we were able to take 3 rocks, 2 on either side, and then a flat slab on top. And on top of that slab, we would put the cakes to cook, and they'd be cooking over hot coals that we place underneath. So the electric skillet is great, it's modern, you just plug it in and it works, but it's not necessarily any more efficient than the old ways. The old ways were able to conduct that heat just as well as this electric skillet. Before we can place the cakes onto the skillet, I like to grease it just a little bit. You don't need a lot, just a little bit, just to get it a little slippery so they don't stick too much. You can use sunflower oil if you want to be, authentic, or you can just use whatever vegetable oil you might have on hand. Or if you want to add an additional layer of flavor to this too, you can use pumpkin seed oil. This one is a toasted one, but I just think it smells so great. It's just like pumpkin seeds, so it's great. So I'm just going to take a little bit of it and just kind of use this paper towel to coat the bottom. You don't need much. And then I'm just going to take each cake. You can hear that sizzle. So after about 5 minutes, you're going to want to turn them. You can see they have a nice crisp bottom. So I've done half these with the pumpkin seed oil and the other half with the sunflower oil. And cook on the other side for at least another 5 minutes, maybe a little longer, just depending on how thick they are, because you want to make sure they're nice and cooked through and through. And my strawberry breads are all cooked, and I'm really happy with the way they came out. They have a really good texture, not too coarse, not too fine, and the strawberries are nicely distributed throughout. When you break them open, you can see that they're nice and evenly distributed. The strawberry flavor is just wonderful, and I think these are really good. I think they're best served warm, but you can certainly eat them at room temperature.
Now it's time to make the second version of this recipe.
Now we're going to make a version of this strawberry bread recipe using ingredients that the Europeans brought to the New World.
One of the ingredients the British brought to the New World was wheat. However, according to Plymouth settler and leader Edward Winslow, wheat was not grown in 1621 in favor of Indian corn, which did very well. The only British crops Winslow mentioned were planted that first year include peas and barley. Unfortunately, he said the peas were not worth the gathering of their harvest, and the barley did indifferent good. Barley is a form of wheat that contains less gluten than common wheat, so while not great for bread, it is great for making beer. But wheat was soon planted in Plymouth so that British-style bread could be made. Additionally, evidence reveals that the British imported domestic animals into Massachusetts Bay Colony within a few short years of their arrival in 1621. Edward Winslow claimed he gave chicken broth to the Wampanoag sachem Massasoit when he was sick in early 1623. Also in that year, a visitor to Plymouth, Emmanuel Altham, reported there were 6 goats, 50 pigs, and many chickens already in the colony. The first cattle arrived in 1623 on board the ship Anne, and more arrived in 1624 on board the ship Jacob. By 1627, there were 16 head of cattle and at least 22 goats living in Plymouth. These animals were important not just for their meat, but also for the other products they give. With chickens come eggs, and with cattle come milk, cream, butter, and cheese, all primary components of the British diet at that time.
The first thing we're going to do is mix together the wet ingredients. So I've got some water, and this is full fat milk, so whole milk.
1/2 cup water and 1/2 cup milk.
And then I'm going to add in some melted butter.
1/4 cup melted butter.
And for sweetness, some maple syrup.
1/4 cup maple syrup.
And then the last thing we're going to add into this is an egg.
1 egg.
Okay, and we're going to set that aside. So in a separate bowl now, we're going to add our cornmeal. So we're using a yellow, medium grind cornmeal. And then a soft wheat. So this would be a pastry flour type of wheat. Sometimes this would be made from a winter wheat. And we are going to whisk that together.
1 1/4 cups stone ground cornmeal and 1 cup stone ground whole grain wheat pastry flour.
And then for the strawberries, I've decided to use the dried strawberries and mix them together with some reconstituted dried strawberries. So I've just added some boiling water to this, just like I did in the first recipe. You could of course use fresh, all fresh, or a combination of all three if you like, whatever you like. And I like to, in this recipe, I like to add the strawberries directly into the flour mixture to coat them, because when you coat fruit, it prevents the fruit from sinking all the way to the bottom. So I like to do that.
1/2 cup dried strawberries.
Now I'm going to simply add the dry ingredients to the wet. So very, very simple. You don't need to overmix the dry ingredients into the wet. Just mix until everything is evenly distributed and wet, but you can still have plenty of lumps in here, that's fine. The other thing you're gonna have to do is make sure you have a baking pan ready, or a plate. This is a nice earthenware pie plate. You wanna grease it with butter. You can use spray oil like Pam if you prefer, whatever you like. And you just transfer the contents. And there's no leavening agents in here like baking powder, baking soda, so you don't really have to be concerned that this is going to cook over and puff up. That's not really going to happen, so you can fill it up pretty well. Jiggle it around a little bit. And you're going to pop this into a 400-degree oven and cook for about 20 to 25 minutes, or until firm, and when a skewer inserted into the center comes out clean. Here is a slice, and you can see all the beautiful strawberries littered throughout the bread, making it really, really delicious. So we have 2 different versions of the same recipe for strawberry bread, and both a little bit different, but both equally delicious. I hope you do try one of them.